So if I click on, so just remember this link, okay? And if I click on this folder here, then it shows me two files. These are the files I would cover today. And as we go by, I'll add more and more files to this repository. Okay. So don't worry about like how to get it onto your computer, how to install Python, what environment do I use. I'll take you through all that. Okay. Step by step. So let me just click on the first file here and I'll use this as, just this is our first module. This is the introduction to Python, right? Uh, and you can also open it on your computers. So I'll just give you a moment. From the website, click on this GitHub repository, then go into this first folder, which is Course 1 Core Python Programming, and then open this first file, Introduction to Python. Okay. Okay. So I'm sure you've encountered Python. Some of you might already be writing some basic code in Python, right? But in addition to writing code, it's also important to understand what this language is about. How did it, like, who started, who created Python, right? What is it used for? What are the programming paradigms that are enabled with Python, right? So once you have this higher level knowledge, then a lot of things downstream make a lot more sense, right? So the first thing is, what is Python, right? And it's a general purpose, high level interpreted programming language. So I've covered three things, right? General purpose, high level, and interpreted. So I'll break those down bit by bit, right? So when I say general purpose, I mean you can achieve a whole bunch of tasks with Python, right? Like you can build website backends, you can write analytics and machine learning code, you can automate stuff, you can scrape data from websites, whatever. Like it's a general purpose language, right? And the opposite of a general purpose language would be something that's domain specific. Something like an SQL to communicate with databases, or HTML to define the structure of a web page, right? So we've understood the general purpose part. Now the next thing we look at is high level, right? uh, a programming language is called high level the further you get away from the details of the hardware, right? And when I talk about hardware, I mean like memory locations, call stacks, that kind of stuff. So um, we can focus on concepts like variables, loops, if else, that kind of stuff, and focus on solving the problem. And Python takes care of those internal implementation details for us. So we don't need to go like in the case of C, you have to deal with pointers, which basically are pointing to a particular memory location. So C is like an intermediate to low level language, right? But Python is high level, so we don't have to deal with any of that hardware stuff. And finally, it's an interpreted language. Okay, so anybody who's had experience with Java, you'd know that you'd probably write your source code in a .java file, then you'd compile it to create a .class file, and then you'd run that .class file to execute the program, right? So Python is not like that. Python, you just run the Python program, and the interpreter in the background creates an intermediate representation if the source code has changed, and then it executes it, right? So the intermediate representation, we don't need to perform any step to make that happen. Python handles that for us. And a new intermediate representation is created only if the source code has changed, right? So we've understood the three things now: general purpose, high level, interpreted. So these interpreted languages are normally called scripting languages. So if you hear things like JavaScript, Perl, Python, you'd always refer to them as Python scripts, right? And that's what we mean. It's an interpreted language. So let's get on to some fun facts about Python, right? Uh, Python was created in 91 by Guido van Rossum. I think he might have just joined Microsoft to contribute further to the Python language. And he's been given this title of benevolent dictator for life by the Python community. It's a very loving name. Uh, it's completely open source, which means not just can you use it for free, you can also package it within your software and ship it for free, right? There is this Python Software Foundation that is this organization that administers the Python language, right? So any new feature updates, the roadmap, that kind of stuff, they take care of. Now, Python is written in C. So for all those of you who think C is a useless language, it's absolutely not. C is actually still driving a lot of stuff, right? It's just that we've gone one level higher into Python, and that makes it easier to program. Uh, you'd see a lot of Python 2.7 code all over the place, but just know that 2.7 is not supported anymore. From 1st Jan 2020, only Python 3.5 onwards is officially supported. So make sure you use Python 3.5 plus, right? Uh, and so if you work in like big companies where there's like Python being used for cutting edge stuff, there's a chance that some things might be written in C, C++, and kind of integrated with Python just to get that speed going, right? And here there's this thing called PyPy, which is the Python package index, and that's the official repository for all third-party Python software. Okay, and to manage that third-party software, you have something called pip, which is your package manager. So if you like, for example, Python has a standard library, and if you want to bring additional modules in, you have to use pip as a package manager. So in terms of the main uses of Python, I think it basically comes down into three things, right? One is obviously data science, which is why we're talking about Python. It is the most popular language for data science. Um, all your popular machine learning, deep learning libraries are in Python. Python beats R in terms of execution speed, but in terms of just like statistics, data visualization, and in the academia and the research worlds, R is slightly more popular. But in the commercial world, it's Python head over shoulders over everybody else. The second case is web development, right? So there's a very famous web backend framework called Django. And there are also two others called Flask and Pyramid. So Python is extensively used in building server-side code, right? The backend for web apps. And Instagram has the world's largest deployment of the Django web framework, right? And Django is written entirely in Python. Like even Google, for example, has a Python where we can and C++ where we must policy. And all the top companies in the world use Python for backend development. And then finally, there's this concept of general purpose programming, which is where, like, for example, if you want to write a web scraper or you want to create a UI or you want to just process data, Python can handle any of these tasks, right? So when I say Python is a multi-paradigm language, you've heard of object oriented programming, right? Like that's where you have classes and objects and stuff. So Python supports that. There is something else called functional programming where everything is defined in functions and functions are passed to other functions and so on. So Python also supports that paradigm. And then there's general procedural programming where you have a program start and you have a program end and you have a set of tasks achieved within that. So Python supports all these paradigms. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you a quick question, right? How many of you have Python installed on your computer already? If you have it installed, type yes in the chat. If you don't have it installed, type no. I see a yes, no, no, yes. So I'm guessing some people have it, some people don't. No problem. The point of this course was to, just go from 0 to 100 with Python. So uh, for those of you who do have Python installed, I would say uh, there's definitely some info here for you, so it's not a complete waste. And for those of you who don't have Python installed, you can just follow closely. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes telling you how to install Python, right? So first thing is you go to python.org, right? And just go to the website there and you have all your Python versions for different OSs and so on. I'm guessing most of you are on Windows, so you can just download the latest version here and just click on that button and you get the most recent version of Python. And let me just go to the downloads folder, right? So there is this, this is the Python installer, right? And this is what shows up. Now, when you install Python, just make sure that you check this box, that is add Python 3.9 to path. So check this box and then click on install now, right? Check this box and then click on install now. The reason I'm not clicking on install now is because I already have Python installed. But if you do not have Python installed, double click on that installer, select this option, and then click on install now. I'll just wait for a minute for you to do it. And I'll also give you some information in the background while that happens, right? So what I'm going to show you is to use like the standard Python installer and to use like pip to install packages and to use Jupyter notebooks like directly, right? But there's another Python distribution called Anaconda, right? And this is like one of the, it's like specifically focused on data science, and it's amazing in the sense that it has all the packages pre-installed. It comes with a lot of different software pre-installed. So this is the individual edition of Anaconda, and you can also download this and install it, right? So right from all the libraries to all the different types of editors, like you have Jupyter pre-installed, you have Visual Studio Code, you have so many different things. You can use all of them out of box from Anaconda. So only thing is it's a little heavy, and it takes up a little bit of like, it slows down your computer just a little bit. So I've chosen to use like plain vanilla Python, but you can use even Anaconda if you want, right? So you execute the installer, add Python to path during installation, and then the installer runs and Python has been set up. Okay. But the most important thing is to check if the Python path variable has been set correctly. Now, path is nothing but um, it's an environment variable, right? And in Windows, what path means is all the directories that are listed under path, right? All the executable files in those directories can be referred to directly. Like, for example, if Python's installation folder has been added to Windows path environment variable, it means that I can type Python and then some file name .py, right? So I just need to call the Python name directly. I don't need to provide a long path to it and so on. And that's the advantage of having it included in the path environment variable. Now, if you want to see how to add it manually, I'll show you this. You can just go to the search bar over here and type environment variable, say enter, go here, environment variables, and these are the user level environment variables. These are the system level ones. So I'll just look at the system level ones, and here we have path, right? So I'll double click on it, and it shows you all these different folders that are included in the path, right? Now, if I look here, I should see, here we go. So I see two folders, right? So one is the Python installation folder. This is what it is. And right below that is the scripts folder within the installation folder. So there are two folders that are added to the Python path, right? And now if you want to test whether your Python installation is like proper or not, you open up the command prompt, right? So just type cmd. This opens up the command prompt, and you can just type Python minus minus version and just hit enter, and it shows me I've got Python 3.7.5. Now if, for example, you have multiple versions of Python installed, some of you might have to type Python 3 minus minus version, right? Whenever you do this. Like for me, Python 3 wouldn't work and only Python works because I have only one version of Python installed. Okay. So if you get this answer, like for example, for me, it's Python 3.7.5. If you get this line of text over here, it means your Python installation is fine. So if you are getting this and if you have followed all the steps so far, just type yes in the chat box. Okay, I see a few yeses. That's good. Great. So we'll go ahead with this. Uh, just to let you know, like there is an option for you to not install Python also. Okay, but I just think it's better for you for your learning for you to install it on your local machine, right? But if by chance you do not want to or you cannot, then I'll show you these different Python development environments, and Google Colab is the one you're going to be using, right? So if you have it installed, then you can choose from one of 5 different environments. But if you don't have it installed, then this is the one you have to use. Okay. So I'm going to assume everyone's gone ahead and installed Python successfully. Kudos to you. That's your first major step towards learning Python. So congratulations. Now let's proceed with the rest of this intro to Python tutorial. Okay. So what have we looked at, right? So we've looked at what Python is. We've looked at these different like general purpose, high level interpreted. We've seen some fun facts about Python. We know about Python package index. We know about pip. We know that it's written in C. We know that it's a high level programming language. Another important thing is to know that it's a batteries included programming language, which means there is a standard library which provides some functionality out of the box, right? And that functionality is very vast. So basically, it's like saying, I'm giving you everything off the bat, right? You don't need to sit and create everything from scratch. We've seen the 3 main uses of Python, which are data science, web development, and general purpose programming. We've seen how to install and set up Python, either using the installer from python.org or Anaconda. We ran the installer, we added Python to the path, and then checked if the path environment variable was set correctly, right? And then Python minus minus version will give you the version of Python that you have installed. So now we're at this final stage of this first file of ours, right? This first tutorial file. So let's choose your Python development environment, right? Now, you all know that in any language, whenever you start, the first thing you always do is a hello world program, right? So let's create a hello world program over here, right? Now, this first thing is called Python in interactive mode, right? So it's it's called REPL, right? Read, evaluate, print, loop. So it reads your command, it evaluates it, it prints out the answer, and then it's ready for the next command. That's basically what it means, right? And we can use the exact same command prompt that we used over here. And let's just say Python, right? So now you can see these 3 arrows that were created over here. So that means, and you can see this blinking cursor. So that means it's ready for your input, right? So let's type print, and print is a function. So open brackets and you pass the hello world string to print, right? Hello, comma, world, exclamation mark, and then you close the string and you close the brackets. So we have print, the function, and the argument to that function is hello world, the string, right? And then you just say enter, and you can see that it's printed hello world. Can everyone try this, please? Just try this option. I'll wait for you. I'll give you a minute. open the command prompt, type Python. You'll see these three arrows and a blinking cursor. Type print hello comma world and hit enter. So when you hit enter, it reads your command, it evaluates it, it prints the output, and then it loops to the next command. Right? So now this is one option, right? And you can build any you can write any code here. For example, you say a equal to 5, print a and so on, right? So you can write Python code in this environment. So this is one option for your development environment. And to exit this, you just need to type quit, open brackets, closed brackets, and say enter. Okay, so this is called interactive mode, REPL, right? The same thing is also available over here. You just search for idle. If you've installed Python using the standard installer, then you just need to click on idle and it'll give you the exact same environment which I just showed you. So here again, you have those three arrows, you have a blinking cursor, you type print hello world and you say enter, right? And it's printed hello world. And here all you need to do is click on the close button. So now we've seen our first option, right? Which is Python in interactive mode. Now the next thing we look at is using a text editor like Notepad. And it's not like you're practically going to use Notepad, but any programmer should know the power of writing code in Notepad. Okay, it's incredibly powerful, and you don't need to you don't need any heavy duty editor to write simple code. So I'll just give you an example. Let me open up Notepad over here, right? And I'll just write print hello world, right, in Notepad, and I'm going to save it, right? So I'm going to save it on the desktop and I'm going to save it as type all files, and I'll say hello underscore world dot py. Now just remember, Python files have a .py extension. Okay, that's simple Python scripts. So just say hello underscore world dot py and say enter, right? So we've saved our file. Now again, let's go back to this command prompt, and you have to navigate to the folder in which this is there, right? This file. Now I'm in my user folder, that's C users Vikram. So let me just navigate to desktop and just confirm that my file is there. I can see that hello underscore world dot py is there. So all I need to do is type Python hello underscore world dot py, right? So again, this Python command is that executable which is there in the path variable. So we don't need to specify some fancy path. All we need to say is Python. Windows finds it. Windows finds python.exe. And this is the name of the file. Okay. Now let me say enter. And it gets executed. And this is the message that gets printed. If by chance we didn't navigate to this folder, right? Let's say we were back at the previous folder. So then I would need to pass the path to the file and then the file name.py. In this case, first we have the folder which is desktop, and within that we have hello underscore world dot py, right? And we get the same output. So this is another very powerful way to write code. It might seem like it's not very powerful, but I can assure you any programming language that we're used to, whether it's C or Java or whatever, there's nothing as powerful as just opening up Notepad, writing some code and executing it using the Python or the Java command, right? Okay, good. I see a lot of you have done this already. Excellent. Keep it going. Now, we have seen how to use interactive mode. We've seen how to use a text editor like Notepad, right? Now, you also know that there are lots and lots of like commercial or even like free IDEs, right? What is an IDE? It's an integrated development environment. Basically, it makes writing code a little easier because there are so many different features. Like there's autocomplete, there's IntelliSense, there's like warnings, errors, debugging, all that fun stuff, right? Uh, the IDE that I use is called Visual Studio Code, and it's really powerful, right? It's this open source IDE developed by Microsoft, and you have extensions for all languages, right? Like I've written Java code in there, I've written JavaScript, I've written HTML, CSS, Python, everything, right? So I've got it on my task pane here. So let me just click on Visual Studio and I'll show you what it looks like. You can download it on your own time. There's no hurry to do it right now. This is just for your information. So it's just opening up, and yeah, so this is the Explorer, right? Uh, this is the extensions part. So Visual Studio is like this core that is like really flexible, and you need to install the right extensions to make use of it in the way that you want. Like the two most important extensions for writing Python are, one is I'll just look at the installed ones, right? So Jupyter is really important, and Python is really important, right? So just you can search for extensions over here. You just say Python, and it'll click on this, and you can, like for example, there is an install button here because like I've not yet installed this, but this one's already installed, so there's no install button, right? So the two important ones are Python, that is for normal .py files, and Jupyter for Jupyter Notebooks, which is I'll explain a little bit more about Jupyter in just a couple of minutes. So what happens is when you install Python, Visual Studio Code automatically, like I'll just open a file here, right? And let's say I've opened a .py file, right? So it senses that it's already Python, and over here it's already found this particular Python interpreter in the path variable. So it's automatically found it for you. And if you have multiple installations, you can choose which Python interpreter to use. Okay, so you can also consider using Visual Studio Code. I'll just close this for now. So we finished like three different development environments now. And now for the two most fun ones, I would say, and probably the ones you're going to use most often, right? This is Jupyter Notebook, right? Jupyter Notebook, and any online tutorial you see, that's pretty much what they're using. Any company you work at, that's where how they're writing code. So Jupyter Notebook is really important for you to understand, right? Uh, for example, what I've uploaded here, this whole file that you see in front of you is actually a Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so the way you would install it is, if you had Anaconda, you would directly like go to Anaconda Navigator and just click on Jupyter Notebook. But if you install Python from this python.org, remember I told you, right? There's this thing called pip, which is the Python package manager, right? So all I would do is, like as written here, I would say pip install Jupyter Lab, right? Jupyter Lab, and then hit enter. Now, what it does is it installs this Jupyter Notebook, uh, which is like an interactive computing environment, right? And I already have it installed, so I'm not going to press enter. But what you should do is type pip install Jupyter Lab, right? So it'll collect the Jupyter Notebook information and the code from the Python package index, and it'll install it for you. So let me just show you how to access Jupyter Notebook once you have installed it. So we type pip install Jupyter Lab, it installed Jupyter Notebook. Now we just need to type Jupyter space notebook, right? And it'll start a local server, right? And from this local server, you can open any number of notebook files. And the location where the server is open is basically here, right? C users Vikram. So this is where I wrote the Jupyter Notebook command. So this is the view that opens up to me. So under users, I have desktop. Under desktop, I have Python programming. Let's say I have Mission AI courses live. This is the first course, core Python programming. And these are my two files here, right? And you would probably see a white background with some black text on it. Mine looks different because I have customized it a little bit. And if you want to know how to customize it, I can show you that a little later on, but it's not very important right now. So I'll just click on this and a new tab opens up, right? And in this tab, you see this exact same thing that I'm showing you from GitHub, right? And so basically you have two types. All of these are cells, right? So wherever you see a lot of text and explanations, that is a, markdown cell, right? And another type of cell where you actually write Python code, like for example here, is it's a code cell. So when you run a cell, only that cell runs. So this is the advantage. Like for example, if you're experimenting, let's say your project has 10 steps, right? And you write a different set amount of code for each step and you put them all in different cells. So you can run cell 1 to test part 1 of the project and run that separately. Once that is done, you can go to cell 2 and write part 2 of the project. So that way you don't need to run the entire thing, and you can debug and figure out which part is working, which part is not. So this is basically the Jupyter Notebook environment. Remember, pip install Jupyter Lab to start with, and once it's installed, Jupyter space notebook, right? It opens in this location. Then you navigate to the location where your Jupyter notebooks are located, and the extension here is .ipynb, which is basically an IPython notebook. Okay, so IPython is this interactive computing environment. It's now called Jupyter. Cool. So has everyone got to this stage? Has everyone understood what Jupyter Notebook is? Uh, and have you got it installed on your computer? You can just type yes if that's the case. Excellent. I can see some of you have already done it. That's great news. Now, this is the absolute last part of this first, uh, like the first file, right? This is for those of you who don't want to install Python on your computer or cannot install Python on your computer, you have to use Google Colab, right? So this is like Python in the cloud. It's like Python, it's like Jupyter Notebook for your Google Drive. Now, the good thing is I noticed that like in all the signups that I found for the course, almost like 99% of you had Gmail IDs, right? So that means you have access to Google Drive as well, which means you have access to Google Colab also. So what you need to do is go to colab.research.google.com. This link is there in the notebook that I've shared with you. So just go here. I'm going to close these other links, right? So now when you open Colab, it has this like pop-up box, right? That makes it convenient for you to like, if you want to see examples, they're here. If you want to see recent files, they're here. You can also open files from Google Drive. You can open files from GitHub, and you can also upload an IPython notebook, right? So let me make it really simple for you and show you two different options, okay? The first one is GitHub, right? Now, I told you that this is our GitHub repository, and uh, like I've stored all our course material in this repository, and this is where you can access it as well, right? So let me just copy this URL. This is the link to our first notebook, right? So all I need to do is go to Colab and paste it over here, right? And just type enter. So it shows you which repository, which branch, and it shows you like that there are two Python files, that is module 1 and module 2. So I want to open the first file, right? So let me just click on this. And now Colab has opened this file directly from GitHub, right? This is the exact same file that you're seeing on GitHub over here. You are now seeing it in .ipynb in Google Colab. And if you want to save it in your Google Drive, you just need to say copy to drive, right? And I told you there are two types of cells in Jupyter. One is a code cell, one is a text cell or a markdown cell, right? This is the text one. You see markdown here? That's what they refer to as text over here, right? So now let me just open the other one, right? The second notebook. So I'll just say open notebook. I'll go to Google Drive. Sorry, I'll go to GitHub, and I'll open the second one, this module 2, variables, basic data types, and click on that. So here you'll see these text cells, and further down here, for example, you'll see these code cells, right? And next to the code cell, there is a run button. So this is what you will use to run your code, right? Uh, so this is one way of accessing what code I've already put up in our repository. So you see this thing over here. There's no need to copy it like this and copy it into an IPython notebook. What you can do is open it directly in Colab and copy it to your drive, just using the URL. The second option would be, let's say I just want to save it to my local computer, right? So what had I done initially? I'd gone to Mission AI courses. I had gone to this course one folder, and I had clicked on module 1, right? And this whole file opened up. Now, if I want to save it to my local computer, I just need to click on raw, right? It shows this in this raw format. You can see raw.githubusercontent.com, and then you just type Control S to save, right? And you can just change it from txt to all files, and you can remove this .txt from the extension and say yes. So now you have saved this file to your local computer, right? And you just need to access it in the same way that we went to this particular folder and then type Jupyter Notebook, right? Then when your tab opens up, it will show you that this IPython notebook is accessible to you. So I had shown you, one is you open it in Colab directly from GitHub. The second one is you go to GitHub, see the raw version of the file, and then do Control S, that is save. Another way to get the code from this repository would be go to this home of the repository, click on this code button here, and say download zip file, right? So you can just download the zip file, extract it, and then use it like how you would use any other IPython notebook or code file. And then finally, there is something called GitHub Desktop. Okay, uh, it's really convenient to work with Git through GitHub Desktop rather than sitting and writing git init, git add, git commit, git pull. Instead of doing that, we can just work through this directly, right? And all you need to do here is click on File, clone repository, and enter this URL. this Mission AI courses URL and just paste it over here. I'll say URL here, paste it over here, and that's all. So I'll have to choose a different folder for this. But basically, you now know how to clone a repository. Cool. So I hope you've understood this. Colab is a very convenient way to, either create a notebook from scratch by saying new notebook, or open a notebook from like Google Drive or GitHub, or even through direct upload, right? Uh, Another way, as I mentioned, was to just download the zip file from the repository homepage. Another way is to go to the raw file and to press Control S. So you have multiple ways of accessing the code now from the repository. So that brings us to the end of this first module, right? It's just an introduction to Python. I hope you've got an overall idea of, you know, uh, like how to install it, how to use it, what are different dev environments you can use. If you've understood all this clearly, please type yes in the chat box. Excellent. I see that everyone's understood. That's great to know. Now, uh, I'm going to go back to this. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to work with me at the same time, right? Like, I don't want to be just giving you instructions. I want you to write code with me. Okay. So, what you do now is just go to, I hope you've installed Python. You have everything installed now. Go to the second module, right? Click on raw, type Control S, select all files, remove txt from the name, and save it. Okay. So now you have this file on your computer. Like for me, it's come to the downloads folder. You can save it wherever you want. What you do is now you navigate to that folder here using the type CMD over here. I can go to downloads and I can type Jupyter Notebook, right? So now Jupyter Notebook opens up with a view of my downloads folder, and it will show me all the uh, IPython files in the downloads folder. Now the problem is my downloads folder has so much stuff that it's taking a lot of time and waiting for the cache, right? But wherever you save your file, just open Jupyter Notebook there, and then you can access that file, right? So yeah, I'm just gonna avoid this right now because there's just too much stuff. So I have my code saved over here. You should do the same, and you navigate to this code and you click on module 2. So I had opened the second Jupyter Notebook prompt in my downloads folder. I'm just going to close that. And what I need to do is type Control C. If you remember in your maybe in your engineering days, this Control C is like an interrupt, right? So it says interrupted. So all you need to do is type Control C and it gives you control again of the command prompt. So I'll just close that. But just remember my other Jupyter Notebook is running from this location. So I'm going to go ahead and close this first module because we finished that explanation.